This time, on An Architect's Perspective, I sit down with Professor Tim Benton to explore Villa E1027, Eileen Gray's pioneering house in the south of France. We discuss Gray's partnership with John Badovichi, the controversial murals of Le Corbusier, and how this house came to be one of the most debated buildings of the 20th century. Let's take a listen. Tim, thanks for joining us here today. Before we get started, can you please tell the audience a little bit more about yourself in your own words?
Well, I'm an architectural historian, architecture and design historian. I've worked mostly on architecture and design of the 20th century.
Maybe you could just tell us a little bit how you got involved with this particular house we're sat in.
Well, I first visited the house in 1996 when it was a ruin. There were graffiti on the walls and furniture was smashed
You got
up.
inside the house?
Oh, yes, yeah. I taught for a semester at the Sorbonne in Paris. And one of my students was actually Renaud Barrès, who, just after he did my course, was offered the job by the town hall here to supervise the preparation of the restoration of the house. So I then went down in 2000, basically to see him, and I met Robert Rebutato, who was the son of the owner of the fish restaurant, the Étoile de Mer, which is right next door. Robert Rebutato set up an association in 2000, which I was a founder member of, to try to protect the site. And so he was in touch with Renaud Barrès and so forth. There was a first restoration of the house from 2006 to 2012, more or less. It wasn't a very good restoration.
Right.
And during that time, our association tried to intervene, for example, to insist that the house should not be left empty, but that there should be furniture in it. There should be an attempt to restore the furniture of Eileen Gray.
So you were in this advisory capacity?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's fascinating. I think at this stage it would be quite useful for our listeners to hear a little bit more about Eileen Gray, who she was, her background, and how she ended up designing this wonderful house in this incredible setting on the coast of southern France.
She came from an Anglo-Scottish-Irish family in Ireland.
County Wexford, I think.
That's right. They had a huge house and a very beautiful neoclassical house, in fact, which she loved. Her father was an English painter. Her mother claimed Scottish aristocratic origins and changed the family name to Gray, which is a Scottish name. But her grandfather was Irish, basically. And so they were part of the colonising English ascendancy in Ireland.
Yeah.
So they had a house in London and so forth. And she was a very intelligent, rebellious young girl. So she joined the Slade.
That was in 1900?
That's right. And the Slade was an art school in London which had begun about 10 years earlier to accept women artists. So there were, I think, 24 women artists there when Gray joined. And then with her mother, she visited Paris in 1900. Then in 1902 came back, and then with some of her female friends formed basically an artist group in Paris. And they joined the two different ateliers, the Colarossi and the Julien school, studio, and studied painting. But she also knew lots of people in the Vorticist movement and, lots of interesting intellectuals. And she started designing in lacquer, because in London she discovered a man who was restoring Japanese and Chinese lacquer. His name was Sugawara, and they started making Japanese lacquer pieces, absolutely beautiful pieces of lacquer. Then in the war she went back to England and drove an ambulance and did, the kind of thing that aristocratic ladies did then.
Yes.
And then came back to Paris. She'd rented an apartment.
So she was back in Paris after the war?
Absolutely, straight after the war. And in 1919, she started redesigning the apartment for a wealthy milliner who'd made it good, who traded under the name of Suzanne Talbot. And this was the absolutely astonishing design of the interior with lacquer panels and amazing pieces of furniture, very strange pieces of furniture. And this made her name.
This was the start of her journey into interior design, which should ultimately lead to more architectural commission
Exactly.
or art jobs and such like. So this was the very important commission.
Very important commission. Established her reputation.
So she was on her way designing interiors, mingling with some interesting characters in Paris at the time, architects included?
Yes, though the most interesting people she mingled with were singers and dancers. And this was kind of her lesbian period when she was openly gay. You know, she had a number of gay relationships with people. She was part of a group of American and English gay women, influential women and artists and writers and so forth.
Right.
And shortly after that, she met Jean Badovichi in Holland. Because
roughly the year?
23, 24, we don't know exactly. She did an exhibition, some of the furniture was exhibited in Amsterdam, and the Dutch kind of latched onto her very quickly. And Jean Badovichi did a review of the exhibition for his new journal, Architecture Vivante, and met Eileen Gray that way. And so at this moment, both Badovichi and Eileen Gray were what we would call now Art Deco designers. They weren't modernists, hard modernists. But Badovichi introduced her, as soon as they became good friends, to European modernism, because he was beginning to do issues on Russian constructivism, on the Dutch De Stijl movement, on German modernist architects and designers, and they visited houses like Rietveld's Schröder House in Utrecht. They went to the Bauhaus, they went to the Weissenhaupt-Siedlung.
This is interesting.
And they had a whole education into modern architecture together.
I think it's probably important at this time to reflect upon Badovichi being a very important character. This is actually his house, is it not? So that's an important factor in this, the reason why we're here in a way.
Yeah. And the journal that he established, Architecture Vivante, was the most important modern architecture journal in France. There was nothing comparable to it. All the key, what we would now call the canon of modernism, he had in that journal. So he's an important figure from that point of view as well.
So we're still in the early 20s. We have this professional relationship developing with John Badovichi. And so it was around this time that the idea of a new house started to be discussed, and a site and such like. Maybe you could help us understand what was going on.
Eileen Gray told her biographer that Badovichi said to her, "You should try architecture." "Oh, I didn't think I could do that. I thought that was beyond me." But Badovichi coached her and helped her. She took drawing lessons from a friend, and she did a first design of a house which was for an engineer in the south of France, which is not really like this house. It has some similarities because it was built onto a system of terraces, like you have a lot along this coast. But what it's most like is Mies van der Rohe's concrete house design, which is very much based on De Stijl movement, the Dutch De Stijl movement, which is the movement that Mondrian belonged to. And there was just rectangular compositions of rectangular blocks. And Eileen Gray was very influenced by that. Not least because the Dutch were very nice to her. There are letters to her from J.J. Oud, who was the head of the De Stijl movement, certainly as far as architecture was concerned. So this was a lasting influence on her. And this first design was in that sort of mould.
Right.
But already by 1926, they're thinking of building a house down here.
And the relationship, they were lovers at this stage?
We don't really know. I mean, they were certainly lovers at some point, but there was a big age difference between them, and they were very close friends for all of their lives. But Eileen Gray lost patience with him a bit because he was too flirty. You know, I've seen amorous letters of his to, 5 different women in 1928-29. I mean, by 1930, he already had what the French called an officielle, a full-time mistress. So whatever their relationship was, the sexual aspect was not the important aspect of it.
Yes.
It was an intellectual and one of these very strong complementary friendships.
Yeah.
She was everything he wasn't, and vice versa.
Can you explain why you think Eileen actually built this house?
I think there are two main reasons. One was that she'd already owned a property in Saint-Tropez. She liked to come down here for her vacations. So I think the idea of having a house down here for her vacations was a nice idea. For him, for her, together, not together, but somehow, to have something.
So she was familiar with this area?
That's right. Well, yes, a little bit further up the coast, but the south anyway, the Côte d'Azur. But the other thing is, I think she wanted to try her hand at architecture. This was her next challenge. And Badovichi had been enthusing her and showing her buildings, and she'd done this first essay of a house design. And so I think this was a big challenge. This was the next thing she wanted to do.
Can you understand and communicate to us how much of this building is actually Eileen Gray's design, how much is Jean Badovici's design?
There's very little evidence to go by. There's a few little bits of evidence. Eileen Gray was asked about this by her first biographer, Peter Adam, and she told him we were associated. He had some ideas for the spiral staircase and for the pilotti. And in fact, there is a preliminary design for this house where this wall on the south side was full. It went right down to the bottom. It wasn't open underneath. In that design, there is actually a spiral staircase which goes up to the roof, and actually it would have had a construction on the roof so that you came out with a normal kind of built construction rather than the little glass canopy. So the other clue is that in the handwritten description that Badovichi wrote for what was printed in the Architecture Vivante in the winter of 1929, there's a piece where he writes about the structure, and there he uses the first person, je, I did this, I did that. And in the rest, it's all we. So I think it's very likely that he had an important role in the structure. He describes the slab as being an upside-down structures with the beams above.
Okay.
And I think that was his kind of invention. Yeah. And I think he was responsible for the builder's plans and all that
sort of the engineering and calculations and amount of steel and all that sort of stuff.
But what is absolutely without doubt is that all the interior design was her. There's no question about that. And I think, especially when you compare what he was doing in Vézelay, this must have been largely her design, the whole house.
It has a rather unusual name, this villa, Villa E1027. Can you explain why we call it that?
Yes, we call it that, but we should call it E1027.
Right. Because
it's the letter E and Gray is 7. The seventh letter of the alphabet is Gray. And Jean Badovichi, 10 and B2 in between. So it's her initials enclosing.
E for Eileen.
Yeah.
And 10 is
is J, 2 is B, and 7 is G for Gray.
Right. So to me, that illustrates it's a joint house.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all Badovichi would agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. All the pages of the publication in Architecture Vivante are basically signed Eileen Gray and Jean Badovichi.
Right. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Can you tell us why Eileen Gray chose this location?
Well, one of the things that she was obsessed with is privacy. And the thing with privacy is that when you buy a plot for a house, there's always can be a neighbor who can build and spoil the view or something. So she found a place which was back to the railway line. Nobody could build there. It wasn't on a road. You could only walk there. And it had the sea. So, she was guaranteed privacy and control, complete control of the site here. Whereas, for example, in Saint-Tropez, on the other places that she looked at, there were always building going on all around and so forth.
Right. So it was this seclusion and retreat idea of total privacy at the time. In walking down the slope and arriving at the gates, can you just remind us what we would see?
It's a long story. I think what's most striking about this villa is when you visit it, the way how it reveals itself. It has an almost disguised entrance. You come down a little tiny staircase through the bushes.
Around, yes.
That's right. You can walk down these terraces between these lemon trees. All you see is rather a blank wall of the house. Then you have to find the entrance, which is not obvious. You have to turn around a corner. There is the entrance. Originally there was a white wall, which again facing you, so you couldn't see the doors. There's a service door on the left, an entrance door on the right. You go in, you go through a tight little passage, you turn the corner, and then you have this fantastic view of the sea. And then round the corner is this beautiful view of the living room with all Eileen Gray's furniture, which is just a poem in architectural design. One of the few texts we have by Eileen Gray is a very interesting description of an exhibition. We don't exactly know which exhibition she's talking about, but some sort of exhibition, where she says that you have to create a barrier before you enter. You must stop people seeing all the exhibition. You have to make them go through a chicane. And she talks about the resistance makes the desire for penetration sharper, which is a very interesting way of describing it. So this is what she's done here. So when you come to the front door, there's no front door visible, there's a blank wall, and you have to go through this narrow chicane that brings you out at the point, well, on the one hand, you see the beautiful view of the sea, and then you turn and you have the privileged best view of the rest of the living room.
Yes, yeah.
And so this is controlling the vista, you know.
Yeah, and this living room, could you help us describe and understand what that living room would look like?
Yes, I mean, it's a very delicate harmony of colours, first of all. An off-white wall with this golden colour of the map. There's this map on the wall which is made of golden-coloured tracing paper. There's the blue-coloured divan, blue-coloured screen, and so forth. And there's a kind of symbolism in this. The blue represents the sea, and the brown of the curtains represents the earth of the north side of the house where the terraces are.
Interesting. And I think you would agree that the furniture that you would see in the house is specifically designed for certain moments, be it breakfast in bed, be it an afternoon siesta. There's moments that have been very well catered for and promoted by Eileen, and the furniture reflects those moments and those activities.
It does. And for some people this is controversial, that it's a single flexible space that's designed to be used in lots of different ways, okay, which is a very modern idea. But in some of Mies van der Rohe's architecture or Le Corbusier's architecture or many other modern architects, you're kind of left to yourself to decide how you're going to use the space. Here she uses the surfaces of the ceramic tiles, the rugs as placemakers, and pieces of furniture which indicate where certain things should happen.
Yeah.
So there's a music corner with a gramophone and a built-in shelves with Bakelite shelves for the discs. The gramophone, she built a piece of furniture that you can pull out onto the terrace to play records. There is a piece of furniture in tubular steel which is a kind of tea apparatus. It's all designed for tea, with shelves for cake stand and things like that. There's the corner, the divan, where after a nice meal everybody can flop out and have a siesta. And then in the corner there's a private corner, which I think of as being very much for Eileen Gray herself, with a built-in piece of furniture, with her kettle so she can make tea, and put everything away. So there's a cupboard for the pillows. There's a cupboard where the mosquito netting can disappear and everything. There's lights so that she can sleep there at night if she wants to, or read, or whatever. So everything is catered for, and it's all in one space.
I think one of the things about this villa and the architecture that we see here today, it's an evolution of modernism. It's not the strict modernism that maybe Gropius and such like spoke about. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how this house fits in with the wider canon of modern architecture.
We can answer that question in two ways. We can analyse the house, or more easily, we can look at the article that Badovichi and Gray wrote together in Architecture Vivante, called From Eclecticism to Doubt. And that is a critique of the functionalist aspect of modernism, where they say modernism has become too pure, too intellectual, too cold. It's left out sensuality, it's left out human quality, it's left out comfort, and all of those things. So that's what she, and I'm sure that's her speaking, and that's what she thought she wanted to introduce into the canon of modern architecture.
With that in mind, Tim, Le Corbusier said a house is a machine for living in. What would Eileen Gray say about that?
Well, what she did say, what she and Badovichi said in this article, is that a house is like a snail's shell. which is actually a quote from Le Corbusier. But what they basically mean by that is, if you interpret the phrase "a house is a machine for living in" as functionalist, that is, a house is only a series of functions, then
shelter and such like.
Shelter, yeah, exactly. Then she's against that, because a house should be a home, it should be welcoming, it should be sensual, it should make the senses flourish, all the five senses flourish. Le Corbusier thought part of that as well. As I say, "The house is a snail's shell" is a quote from Le Corbusier. He did say that for too long we have put the snail into a box. It's time to put the snail back into his shell. That's a quote from Le Corbusier. He was trying to make houses into homes, but he had a completely different idea of how to do that.
But in a roundabout way, the house we're at here today is a critique, on Le Corbusier's idea of modernism and
Yes,
the five pillars of architecture.
but not in the way that people say.
Okay, tell us more.
So Le Corbusier was a formalist, because his other famous statement is the light is, architecture is the knowledgeable, le jeu savant, correct et magnifique des volumes sur la lumière. Architecture is the knowledgeable, correct, and magnificent play of light on volumes. So he was a formalist. What he believed in was the effect of light on form.
Yes.
And this is what this house isn't. This is a house which is designed from the inside out. It's what you do in the house, what you see from the house. It's got a nice view from the exterior, but that's not the strongest point in the house.
Yes. That's a fundamental departure from how Le Corbusier would see his architecture.
Yes. I mean, he does say that a house is designed from the inside, but his houses weren't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The murals painted by Le Corbusier. Is it vandalism, or is it something that adds to the narrative of the house?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there's no question that taking this opportunity at Badovici's invitation to paint on these walls was a mistake, ethically and from taste. He would never have done this to one of his own houses of the 1920s, which is the kind of house this is, a purist house. There is a complete antipathy between his style of painting and the aesthetic of Eileen Gray. Having said that, they're there now. They can't be removed. And we've covered up the most egregious one, which is the one in the living room, which is the worst painting, the first painting he did, where he wasn't prepared. He didn't have any paints. He just used 3 colours of house paint, which he bought in the town, mixed with petrol, Right. So it's very crude in colour and it's crude in form. So it's very good to cover that one up. I think some of the other paintings are in themselves nice paintings. It's the kind of thing that you'd say about somebody who has a house which has a Georgian house and puts a Jackson Pollock painting in it.
You wouldn't approve of that?
Well, I wouldn't be the first to argue against it. If that's what the client likes, the painting is a good painting, the house is a nice house. You just have to read it in a certain way. And so what I said when I was training the guides is you have to treat this as a dialogue. And for the very important reason that the visitors to this house are either Eileen Gray fans or they're Le Corbusier fans. So you have to imagine these people talking to each other, and that's how you should present it.
But you seem quite sympathetic to what we see here today with the murals. However, I think you would probably reflect that Eileen Gray wasn't
Absolutely
as sympathetic.
And
maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah. When Eileen Gray saw the photographs of these murals in 1948, which is the first time she knew that they'd been done, because Badovichi never told her. So when she found out, Badovichi wrote a very bitter letter to Le Corbusier saying, "You've used my house as a laboratory to carry out your own whims and so forth. You've spoilt it all. I must ask you to take the paintings away," and so forth, to remove the paintings. And there's an angry exchange of letters. Le Corbusier writes back and says, "Okay, I'll remove the paintings as long as you photograph them first." And
which he did?
Which he had them photographed, yeah. Well, one imagines that was Eileen Gray, furious with Badovichi, and Badovichi wrote to Le Corbusier.
But would you say the anger increased for Eileen Gray when those photographs were published and there was no reference to the architecture.
But this is very common in magazines. If you look at any of the decorative art magazines or others of the time, you never mention the architect of a house where something is. If you see an interior, it's always the house of Mr. X or whatever. You certainly never mention the architect.
Yes.
So I think that's not a problem. That's not unusual.
Right.
No, the worst part of the publication of these photographs, which he did it in an English language book called The New World of Space. And the worst part of it was that he wrote some really insulting and demeaning and ethically bad, captions. So he said, I only painted on the dark and bad walls of the house. The good walls I left white. That's insulting and wrong.
Unprofessional.
And, he should never have said that.
Right.
And that must have, above all, irritated.
Yeah. So is it impossible to separate this house from Le Corbusier?
I think you could imagine all the paintings being painted over and it being made into an Eileen Gray house only.
Yes.
I think that would be an impoverishment, to be honest. I think as a cultural sensation visiting it, with all the arguments that come and everything, I think it'd be an impoverishment.
Yes, yes.
And I don't agree with those who say that the paintings destroy the house. I spent a lot of time photographing the house. 80% of the photographs I take of the house don't have the paintings in them.
Yes.
These are the best views. You can turn and look at the painting in the dining area if you want to, and it's very big and prominent and so forth. But the main view you want is looking out through the windows.
Yeah. You were here in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And you're a member of the board. Can you tell us about how it arrived in the state we see it here today? What were the different chapters of restoration and such like?
Okay, so in 2000, the Conservatoire du Littoral, which is the organization that runs the whole coastline in France, bought the house after a lot of prompting. At that point, the house was not just physically in a bad shape. There was a lot of exposed reinforcement and rotten concrete, and all of this here we're seeing here had been destroyed, but it had been vandalized. So the living room was covered in graffiti. The remains of this screen here had been kicked to pieces with big holes in it.
And there were remnants of the Nazis using certain walls as target practice and such.
And I'm a bit skeptical about this story about Nazis, because the Germans didn't invade the coast here. It was the Italians. It was Mussolini who marched in. As soon as he made the agreement with Hitler, he took the opportunity of retaking this, which the Italians had always thought of as Menton is Mentone, as far as they're concerned, an Italian city. So right up as far as Monaco. So they marched in, and it would have been Italian troops who shot the bullets, probably. But anyway, it was physically in a bad way. And it was decided that a first restoration should be carried out. And the system in France is that for every region, there's an architecte en chef des monuments historiques. There's an architect who is the only person who's allowed to restore listed buildings, because by this time it had been listed.
Not just the murals, the
house itself.
The house itself,
yes. The first listing of the house went back to the 1970s, I think, but was only for the paintings.
By Le Corbusier.
The paintings by Le Corbusier, yeah. The house was the lowest grade of preservation, which is basically that the house shouldn't be destroyed completely, was because of the paintings.
And we now understand and reflect that the house was only saved in reality because of those paintings that were somewhat controversial.
Yeah. So then Pierre-Antoine Gattier, who is a good architect, but I mean, he's somebody who's been trained to restore cathedrals and country houses and everything. He just didn't know very much about reinforced concrete and the effect of seawater on concrete and so forth. He did a first restoration, which had good things and bad things. But one of the good things was that he discovered by scratching the paintings and everything, that on the north wall of the living room, at some point, there'd been a big polychrome treatment of brown, blue, yellow, and pink, which had clearly been done by Eileen Gray and then painted over. And this just shows the importance of her influence by de Stijl, because this is like a de Stijl type polychrome treatment of a wall.
Yeah.
So he did this restoration. Various people, including myself, criticized it. And meantime, an Irish film director had decided to make a film, a kind of romance film about Eileen Gray and this house. And they did quite a significant but superficial restoration of the house.
But beneficial when you say superficial?
Well, it was beneficial to the extent, for example, that they painted all the metalwork, which was rusting, and they kept it good for another year before the paint fell off. So it was good.
So it wasn't detrimental to the long-term.
No, they did nothing.
Preservation of the house.
Nothing damaging.
Yeah.
And they kept it going, and they made it look nice, and it made it possible to film there.
And as you say, buildings need to be used, right?
That's right. Right.
So we have a situation. The cameras and set have moved out. The film was deemed a relative success.
Yeah, and it almost immediately started deteriorating again. So this is when Michael Lickerman came along, and he was somebody who has a beautiful house in Menton. He has a house in London as well. He's wealthy businessman, and he was an absolute passionate fan of Eileen Gray.
Fantastic.
And he decided to set up a trust organization to handle the funding, to gather funds. And he set up a cultural company, Cap Moderne, to supervise a new restoration. And I was on that group as the secretary, in fact. And what has resulted is the most fantastic restoration of design furniture that's been done.
Yeah.
It's the absolute model. They used the same materials, the same methods, and with a fantastic knowledge, not just of Eileen Gray's pieces, but of the typical production of things at that time in the 1930s.
So you deem at that stage the conservation had the correct approach philosophically to restoring it to what we see here now today?
Well, I think so. I will defend it. But to be devil's advocate, the dominant view of restoration nowadays is that you should maintain the couche, the historical couche, so that for the memory of different phases. In many cases, I think maintaining the different levels of experience in a building is very nice. I know there's an English country house, forget which one, a 17th century house that burned to the ground.
Yes, National Trust's architectural competition.
Yeah.
Allies and Morrison won it.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a different thing in each room, so that, you can see, part of a room is left actually bare so that you can see the little bits of quills that hold the plaster on and things like that. I think that's very nice to do that sometimes. Yeah. But something like this is just too important,
Yes. How do you foresee the legacy of this house for the years to come?
I think it will continue to be, and rightly, part of the narrative of heroic women architect designers. I think this is part of the emergence of women as creators in the 20th century, and it should stay that as part of that story. I think even more important is it should be about the balance of design and architecture. This is something that I'm very keen about because I've done exhibitions on Art Deco. I'm very keen on design. There was a hierarchy in the Beaux-Arts period in the old days, in the 19th century, between the fine arts, painting, sculpture, and architecture, and the decorative arts. The decorative arts were tradesmen. This changed at the end of the 19th century with the arts and crafts and Art Nouveau movement, and a big movement to try to raise the status of designers. I think some of the most amazing pieces of work are in design in the 20th century, and certainly Eileen Gray, and this is reflected in the prices. One of her chairs fetched, what was it, $14 million? The best-selling piece of the serpent chair.
Yeah, it was sort of a leather chair with timber handles.
Yeah, that's right. That had been bought by Yves Saint Laurent.
Yeah, and resold on his death.
Yeah. And I think quite rightly so. It's an amazing. It should be ranked with works of art, with paintings by Picasso and Braque and so forth. And so I think here the furniture is absolutely at the same level of
as
work.
As a Picasso,
but as the building especially. So, that you shouldn't imagine that the furniture is subsidiary in any way to the architecture. It's a fully active part of the aesthetic and of the working of the house.
Yes. You've been studying Eileen Gray for many years now. What are your hopes and ambitions for her legacy in the years to come?
Well, I think this house has had a great success in diffusing the ideas of Eileen Gray to the public, because there are 11,000 visitors a year. The house, which is owned by the Conservatoire du Littoral, has been handed over to the Centre des Monuments Nationaux, which is the national trust that manages heritage buildings. And I think it's very good. I think her place is well established. What would be the cherry on the cake for me would be to finish the story and be able to visit the Villa Tempe a Paya that Eileen Gray designed for herself a few kilometres away, which is now going to be made, we hope, open to the public eventually.
We understand it's just been sold and there's potential movement to open the house up.
Yes, it's not quite sealed yet, but yes, this is...
But it's interesting you use the word diffuse the ideas of Eileen Gray. Can you just explain a little bit more?
I'm sorry, that's a Francisism, that's a French word, diffusion. It means propaganda, it means... promoting, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's not just necessarily promoting it, it really brought the house or Eileen Gray into centre and front stage of modernism.
And for the right reasons,
Yes.
Not as a victim, but as a creator.
Yeah.
And anybody visiting this house is not going to be distracted by, rhetoric about abuse by Le Corbusier. I mean, the house is so strong, it's so beautiful, that you can have views for or against the paintings, but you still appreciate the beauty of the
But
house.
I think we would go further to say the house is beautiful, but so are the interiors and the furniture and so on
Absolutely,
and so forth. And
the whole
treatment
house,
of
the whole
space.
package, absolutely. Yeah.
I think on that note, Tim, we must draw it to an end, and I must say thank you very much for all your knowledge and insight. It's been a wonderful day walking around this house and talking to you more about it. Thank you so much.
And thank you for inviting me back to a place where I've spent many, many happy years working.
It's been a pleasure. Just before we finish, can you just tell us a little bit more about where the audience can find out more about you and your research and work in general?
I wrote the guidebook to the site, to the whole site, so you can pick that up in here in the thing. I wrote a long article in AA Files, the Architectural Association journal, on the relationship between Le Corbusier, Badovichi and Eileen Gray. I've written a piece on the shop that Eileen Gray ran, Jean Désert. I've written another piece on the manuscript description that Badovichi wrote, which is the original draft of what was published in Architecture Vivante. And I've written a book on Le Corbusier's paintings in the house.
Thank you very much.
Next time, on An Architect's Perspective, I sit down with Dr. Carmen Espiguel to continue our exploration of Villa E1027. Carmen reflects on Gray's complex legacy, her confrontation with Le Corbusier, and how her ideas continue to shape architectural thinking. The full video will be on YouTube if you'd like to watch, or if you prefer to listen, just search for An Architect's Perspective wherever you get your podcasts.